The first one that I really had the pleasure of sitting down with that stood out to me was Mike Lindell. And the reason for that is because back in 2020, when things went the way they did, Mike Lindell was somebody I watched personally before I was even working here at AMAC, and I was always relying on his insight for what was going on with election integrity. That was a real treat for me, getting to pick his brain personally. I almost felt like I knew him from watching him so much. And
Congressman Barry Loudermilk, out of Georgia, he is just an incredible man. He understood that the January 6th and all that the left made it out to be, all of that needed to be verified. He trusted the American people and he trusted Donald Trump. He understood that Donald Trump did not incite a riot. Well, I'm excited about 2025 and the incredible interviews that you and I have prepared coming up. I know that we'll be interviewing a slew of people in great leadership roles that will be really carrying the ball, and I'm excited to see what 2025 can bring. Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. Welcome back to Better for America and Happy New Year. Today, I'm joined by my colleague and AMAC contributor, Matt Kane. Matt, it's great to be with you today.
Great to be with you today. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. You know, Matt, in 2024, we've had some incredible interviews. We've worked with so many different people, and you and I thought that this would be a great time to talk about sort of what stood out, recap 2024, and talk about the extraordinary guests that we had on Better for America.
It really was a great year, a historic year for the whole country. And for us personally, we got to sit down with a lot of important leaders and thought leaders on a lot of different issues. So for me, the live interviews are great at the People's Convention and at CPAC, but there were really three that stood out, more than three, but we'll keep it to three for the sake of this interview. But the first one that I really had the pleasure of sitting down with that stood out to me was Mike Lindell. And the reason for that is because back in 2020, when things went the way they did, Mike Lindell was somebody I watched personally before I was even working here at AMAC, and I was always relying on his insight for what was going on with election integrity, and he always ties things back into faith. So when I got to sit down with him in June at the People's Convention, that was a real treat for me, getting to pick his brain personally. I almost felt like I knew him from watching him so much, and to his credit, too, he's a very down-to-earth man, despite being, the My Pillow guy forever and now so involved with election integrity and President Trump. He was terrific to sit with. I felt like he would have sat there with me for another hour if he wanted to. But really getting to talk about the state of election integrity in 2024 compared to 2020, that was a real treat for me, and for him to end off on a faith-based message. This was before the assassination attempt on President Trump, and even prior to that, he said President Trump was a very faith-filled man. He was very aware of his role from a spiritual lens for the country. So I really enjoyed that interview with Mike Lindell. There were a couple others, obviously, that I want to talk about. Jack Posobiec came on right before the election. Jack Posobiec is one of the great thought leaders for the conservative movement, a big social media presence. And we got to talk to him a little bit about the attempt on President Trump's life, not only in July at Butler, but the second attempt at West Palm Beach in September. And he had a book that came out about that. So we talked a little bit about some of the things that have been buried in the investigative side of those attempts, and obviously what he thought about the election. He ended up being right about quite a lot. President Trump won, and he was pretty much spot on about where the state of the country was. So that was a real treat for me. I got to see him on the campaign trail quite a lot, and he's another, really what I've noticed from a lot of these people that are very well known is they're very gracious. Nobody in this movement, the MAGA movement or the pro-America movement, really thinks that they're more important than anybody else. They really are pretty gracious with their time, and when you speak to them off camera, it's not like they're these personable people on screen and then they come off, they dart out of there and don't give you the time of day. They really want to talk about it, and it's because of the people they are, but they're also passionate about it. I mean, when you and I shut off the camera, we talk about these things as well, and it's because it's actually meaningful to us personally. So that's been a real privilege. And then the last guest that really stood out to me, he actually just had a movie that just came out, was Dr. and Professor John Eastman. He was really at the center of attention back in 2020 when President Trump was trying to contest the election. He was one of President Trump's legal representatives who, with 18 others in Georgia, were indicted along with President Trump, and getting to really talk to him about what went on face-to-face personally as opposed to through a media lens where they were talking about how it was a fake elector's scheme and all these frivolous things that he blew out of proportion. To get to talk to him one-on-one and really hear his side, I know I enjoy that personally, and I got to see his movie this past weekend, The Eastman Dilemma, which I encourage everybody to check out because it's another unfiltered and actually factual representation of what he was involved with. So the short of it, those three really stood out to me. I enjoyed speaking with everybody, but those three I just felt like were really pivotal to this last 4-year window. I mean, John Eastman, everything we've had to endure as a country the last 4 years really hinged on January 6th of 2021, and John Eastman was center stage that day. So those three to me stood out. Again, I could probably go on about another 5 or 10 more, but those three really had an impact on me, and I enjoyed them. But I want to hear what you think about your guests as well.
Yeah, well, I think you're right on. Those were incredible guests. And John Eastman, boy, he went through so much, and not many people could withstand that kind of attack. And, we saw what's happened over the last 4 years. The country looks like a different place than it looked, say 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And the three interviews that really stood out for me were very unique people. Congressman Loudermilk, Barry Loudermilk, out of Georgia, he is just an incredible man. He understood that the January 6th and all that the left made it out to be, all of that needed to be verified. He trusted the American people, and he trusted Donald Trump. He understood that Donald Trump did not incite a riot. And it was crazy how we learned, all of us through legacy media and through the left, really trying to teach us and tell us, all generations, that January 6th was the worst offense that had ever occurred on American soil. And I just scratch my head and I say, I know people who were there. There were many peaceful people there. There were not people going in with guns. There were no civilians that were shooting at police officers. It wasn't all what it was crapped up, what they said it was. And there were a couple of clips that I wanted to share because when Loudermilk came on with us, it was in February of 2024. And I want you to listen to what he had to say.
Shots were fired in the Capitol. Then Nancy Pelosi decided, yes, we need the National Guard, and she approved the request to go to the Pentagon.
Oh, that sounds like a gunshot.
The National Guard cannot be deployed to the Capitol unless they are requested by the Congress. On the days leading up to January 6th, the Capitol Police Chief, who was then Stephen's son, he knew he was going to be low on force. He wanted to supplement that with National Guard. So he made a couple of requests for National Guard. That request had to be approved by the Capitol Police Board, which gets their marching orders from the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate. So Chief Son had made a couple of requests in the days leading up, and it was denied because they didn't like the optics. During January 6th, when the breach of the Capitol happened, he made another request that was also turned down because of optics. Now, this is like when the outer perimeters of the Capitol were being breached. Folks were coming up to the Capitol. He made another request. That was turned down.
Now, fast forward, Matt, just last month of 2024, December of 2024, Congressman Loudermilk released this interim report, and it detailed more findings, around the January 6th date. Now, the investigation, and I just think that this is just mind-blowing, the investigation revealed that, in fact, Chief Sund, he was denied approval to deploy the National Guard. Okay, Nancy Pelosi didn't like the optics. She had some things to say there as well. Cassidy Hutchinson changed her testimony after communicating with Liz Cheney and started to say that Trump tried to take control. The whole thing was a setup. I know our listeners, people who are listening, get that. But it just really, I thought it was so great that Barry Loudermilk, back in February of 2024, was the loudest voice saying, no, we got to get to the truth. And now what did we learn just last month? More and more is coming out of this. That was just incredible.
Yeah, and you mentioned that our listeners and our members, AMAC members, know this, but I think the biggest difference between 2021, the 2020 election, January of 2021, and 2024 now is that people beyond the AMAC membership or people who are really invested also understand that now. Back in 2020, again, early 2021, I think it was probably only people such as AMAC members or people who are, for lack of a better term, really plugged into what goes on, really knew about the deceit that went on with the J6 narrative. And now I feel, and I want to know how you feel about this, but I feel like the country overwhelmingly all understands that January 6th is not how it was first portrayed back 4 years ago. How do you feel about that?
Well, I look at the tapes. I look at what the tapes that we do have, that we have been able to see, and we see how the police officers, the Capitol Police, were opening up the doors. We see how people were almost welcomed in, and that they were peaceful. Of course, there were some bad actors. There's no question that people were shattering windows and breaking through and pushing through barricades. But I'd bet that many of those people were there to do exactly that and to create the optics that would really make Donald Trump look like he was inciting a riot. We have so many dozens of people that are in prison, and we'll see what Donald Trump's going to do, whether or not he's going to pardon how many of them he'll pardon, all of them, some of them. But he has said most recently that he intends to set the record straight and free those people. We shouldn't live in a country where innocent people who are at a peaceful rally and walk into their house, the Capitol, right?
The People's House, that's right.
The People's House, and see them removed from their family and their careers destroyed, all because we have a radical, crazed left that wanted to go to any end to ensure that Donald Trump wasn't able to become president.
Well, and the timing of that day was very important as well, because that was 2 weeks before the inauguration of Joe Biden. But at that day, for example, Senator Ted Cruz proposed a 10-day audit, which was, historically speaking, perfectly fine. It happened over 100 years prior, where there was a disputed election, and a forensic audit and analysis was requested and granted. So that whole day, it was so important to create a scenario where chaos ensued that prevented anybody from really being confident to still object to that election. So the timing of that date was very important as well. And again, as I said, and you agreed, years later now, 4 years later, people see it for what it is. The silver lining is President Trump will be president again. However, I always catch myself and say it wasn't a complete perfect ending or a perfect silver lining, because a lot of people suffered as a result of January 6th and really the last 4 years in general. But now moving forward, I'm curious to see what President Trump does regarding the January 6th hostages as well. And I believe he's going to grant a large amount of pardons, and I hope he does.
Yeah, and I do pray that justice will be served. And speaking of justice, it reminds me of another great guest, and his name is James Lindsay. And I really enjoy him so much. He is a thinker, he is an intellect, and he is an expert on cultural Marxism, American Maoism, as he describes it. And, he actually quoted President Biden as an example of sort of what does that look like in society. When Joe Biden said about COVID that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, what Joe Biden was doing was pitting one class against the other.
Marxism is based off of the hypothesis that all of history is the movement of class conflict, class antagonism. It's always two classes that you identify, you herd everybody in, and you put them in a conflict. One is framed up to be the rightful winner, and one is framed up to be the rightful loser. Then you create a dynamic around that.
And that's exactly what American Maoism is, how James Lindsay describes it. This is identity politics. There's an in-group and there's an out-group. So there are two groups that are pitted against each other. Those that don't comply with the government are looked down upon. And COVID is one great example. Anybody who supported Donald Trump, MAGA Republicans were attacked, another example. But what I really loved about James Lindsay and the interview was he explained how communist Romania, because this is important when we look at past and when we look at the history of communism, Marxism, we can apply the results of those experiments in other parts of the world and understand how much of a failure they truly are. But he explained how communist Romania tortured Christians to try to get faithful people to cross a line. And people would die before renouncing their faith, which is why faith is such a threat to those on the left. In other words, there's this massive cultural shift in America where rugged individualism is no longer, hard work, merit-based recognition is the old way. And the new way is all about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. The color of your skin is what you should be looking at first. And that you can be whoever you want to be. You can be a male, you can be a female, you can be a cat, you can be a dog. They want us to embrace that kind of thing. And we saw that coming from our president, Joe Biden. Kamala Harris ran on that, wanting to provide for free transgender surgeries for prison inmates, allow men to compete in women's sports. So the interview with James Lindsay really was able to help me better understand how, in fact, those ideologies are now part of our world here, our culture in America, and how the schools are to blame in large part.
And you mentioned Joe Biden's role in all of that, right? And there's this belief that the left has made politics and their ideology their religion, right? So remove God from the equation, prevent people from feeling like they're able to freely believe in their own faith, and replace that with whatever ideology they tell you is acceptable. And what's really interesting about that is the left has changed drastically over the past 10 years alone. 10 years ago, as horrible as a president that Barack Obama was, he was not saying these things, at least openly. Right now, a lot of people believe, and I'm one of these people, that he's very heavily involved in the current Biden administration. But even then, back when he was president, the things that we're seeing now are more covert. And now they're obviously comfortable enough with saying so many of these radical things that you just talked about openly and telling everybody else that opposes them that you're crazy for not going along with that. Meanwhile, 10 years ago, the people that are now saying these things, they weren't even in line with it. Nobody would have said 10 years ago as a Democrat member of Congress that boys can be girls, girls can be boys, all the other things you mentioned, because it would have been disqualifying politically. They're the ones who have changed the narrative, and they still tell everybody, you basically have to follow what we say, no matter how extreme and to the left we go. And again, a silver lining, we keep talking about silver linings, but I think that's probably, in addition to all of the positives President Trump has, a lot of their negatives played a large part in why this election was so unifying across the country.
Unifying it was, and that brings me to, you picked three, I'll pick three. Another third incredible guest, extraordinary guest, for me was Kirk Cameron. Now, what was really delightful about Kirk Cameron was that I was able to interview him for the 300th episode of Better for America. So it was a real wonderful thing. But not only that, you know, I grew up in the 1980s. So interviewing Kirk Cameron, he is a beloved actor of Growing Pains. It just really was really quite remarkable. Here's what I loved about the Kirk Cameron interview. He really says, what if this cultural setback that we're all experiencing in America is really a setup for a spiritual comeback?
What if this current cultural setback is really a divine setup for a spiritual comeback led by the family of faith? So I'm doing all that I can, where I can, to uproot some evil and to plant some seeds of truth and goodness and beauty. And I appreciate so much the work that you're doing and that all of you are doing by being a part of AMAC.
And I thought, that's good stuff. What if? And, you know, that interview was back in August, I believe, and then we interviewed him again at our Boot Camp for Boomers event. But the summer interview that I had with him, when he said that to me, I started to pay attention a little bit more. And more, Matt, I'm seeing that people are indeed picking up the Bible sales are off the charts. They're selling like hotcakes. People I'm talking to in Congress, elected, officials and leaders in Washington are speaking about their faith openly. If you turn on Fox News, you're hearing about the importance of faith and that how our country was built on pro-God ideals, pro-God values, freedom of religion. I do want to point out one of my favorite clips. Cameron explained how separation of church and state is not what our founding fathers wanted, and it's really just allowing for the government to overreach. His quote, he said, it's replacing the 10 commandments with 10,000 commandments of the state government. Absolutely,
and that's a little bit like we talked about regarding James Lindsay. It's this replacing God with their ideology at any given moment. And again, the point of changing the 10 commandments to 10,000, that 10,000 is going to grow as well. It seems that any given day, there's certain periods of time where they decide they feel comfortable going more to the left, and it's just going to add on forever and ever. So that's a very good point by him.
Yeah, he was really terrific. Well, I'm excited about 2025 and the incredible interviews that you and I have prepared coming up. I know that we'll be interviewing a slew of people in great leadership roles that will be really carrying the ball. It's the power behind Donald J. Trump. He's had so many marvelous picks, and I'm excited to see what 2025 can bring.
And so am I. And I think there will be a different tone this year. There was a lot of optimism in 2024, a lot of excitement as we barreled towards the election. However, there was a little bit of that anxiety as well, and still living under these disastrous 4 years, there was a lot of pent-up anger, and it was great to talk about those things. It's important. You can't ignore them altogether. But I think this year will just be a completely different tone amongst the guests because now there's a lot of hope. And especially in the first year of an administration, the possibilities are endless, especially when it's President Trump, where he's expanding horizons. He's talking about things that when everybody hears them, they say, that's a great idea, but it wasn't previously really on anybody's mind because he's such an out-of-the-box thinker. So I'm really excited for the optimism that is going to come from these interviews this year, and it should be a really great year.
It's going to be a terrific year. And for all of you out there listening, go to amac.us/first100. That's FIRST 100. AMAC is going to be regularly updating our page as we track all of the great progress that's happening on Capitol Hill in Congress. We will be holding leadership accountable. They've made many promises. We want to hold them to those promises. Promises made. Promises will be kept, I do believe, under Donald J. Trump. But we're excited to share those great developments. We'll be updating that site on a regular basis. And I also want to encourage everybody, tune in to Better for America, where you will find Matt Kane or me, Rebecca Weber. We're going to have incredible guests, and we hope that you'll join us.
Absolutely. And be sure to like and subscribe to all of our social media channels so that you don't miss any of our great hard-hitting content.
Excellent. Matt, your social handle?
You can find me on Twitter at Matt Kane USA. That's Kane, and on Truth Social at Matt Kane.
And you can find me at The Rebecca Weber on X, at The Rebecca Weber on X. And I think it's the same thing for Instagram and Facebook, but you'll find me there, Rebecca Weber. Find us, look us up, follow us, tell your friends and family all about us, and please leave a comment in the section here. We'd love to hear directly from you. If you want Matt Kane and I to come back to you with more episodes just like this, where we reflect on some of the issues of the day, please let us know. And we look forward to coming back to you real soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be with you.
The Association of Mature American Citizens is the conservative voice for Americans 50 and older. AMAC is fighting for the values that you hold dear. Join today. Together, we can write the course of America.